Trauma Therapist Podcast Plus listeners can listen to episodes early and ad-free right now. Become a Plus listener by going to Apple Podcasts, searching for the Trauma Therapist Podcast, and signing up today. Welcome to the Trauma Therapist Podcast, a show about the incredible people dedicated to helping those who have experienced trauma. My name is Guy McPherson, and my mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to inspire each of us to help those around us. All right, Ryan, you ready to do this?
Let's do it.
All right, so 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. I'm very excited to have as my guest today, Dr. Ryan Drzewiecki. Ryan, welcome.
Thank you, Guy. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. So Ryan is an experienced leader with over 20 years of experience in behavioral health administration. He currently serves as a chief clinical officer of Sierra Tucson, a residential and outpatient treatment center which provides care to adults ages 18 and older of all genders who are struggling with addiction and mental health disorders. In addition, he is a consultant with the Mara Group, which focuses on organizational efficiency, company morale, leadership training, and clinical excellence. Ryan, welcome. So before we get going here, share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
Oh boy, so I grew up in Cincinnati. I did my undergrad at Northwestern in Chicago, and then I've been on and off in Phoenix most of my adult life. I left for a few years to do my internship and postdoc at Hazelden in Minnesota. And I did a couple years with All Points North in Colorado. So I kind of ping pong back between the Arizona summers and the coldest places I can find.
Nice. So before we kind of jump into, what it is you do and focus on and want to share with us today, if you can share with us, how did you get into this field and specifically this specialization and interest in the first place?
I love that question. I was listening to some of your old episodes. I forget what it was. Somebody said, isn't it funny how the answer to that question changes every couple of years? And that really resonated with me. I think in some ways, I always knew that I wanted to get into psychology, and I tried to run away from it for a little while because I think I was, I had concerns about the field. And I think eventually I came to say, I do want to get into psychology, but I want to think outside the box. I think I'm very interested in challenging the way that we look at mental health. And I love the trauma-informed kind of frameworks for that reason. It's instead of thinking in terms of the DSM and diagnoses and what have you, I think it really normalizes mental health and normalizes mental health reactions. I think for a lot of people, if you are feeling relatively safe, if you are kind of able to stay in that window of tolerance, you do well. And if you don't feel safe, it's easy to start to get dysregulated. And if you stay dysregulated for a while, that's when it starts to look like mental health and like some of the diagnoses that we treat. But I was always just a really big fan of, normalizing that the struggle is natural, that, obviously there's some more serious or significant conditions, but for most people, depression and anxiety are inevitabilities of life and inevitabilities of living in a society and what have you. And that, I think everybody finds ways to balance and struggle, and everybody struggles in some ways and at some times. And that was always a really important message for me to get across in my work.
When you started your journey, your education into mental health, were you focused on addiction? Was that something you had your sights set on?
I fell into it. I think when I was in graduate school, the short answer is no. I actually started off with special education. I worked a lot with autism back in the early 2000s. When I was in grad school and they said, where do you want to do your practicums and your internship? I think I said anything but substance abuse. I think I don't even know why, but I do remember saying, "Yeah, let's not go that direction." And so, sure enough, my first practicum's in substance use, and then the second practicum's in substance use, and then I recognized that, I think some of my hesitancy was that I didn't think I had a lot of experience with it or familiarity with it. I didn't recognize maybe the role that it played in my family. But once I got into these practicums, I realized, oh yeah, like I have a lot of addictive thinking. I think my family has some of those characteristics, and it felt familiar. It felt like I just knew the language right away. So after a handful of practicums, I did my internship and postdoc at Hazelden, which was a fantastic experience. And I've always kept, one foot at least in the substance abuse field since then.
Hmm. And now, obviously, you're at Sierra Tucson. Let me ask you. You said you fell into that, and you started doing practicum and internships, those types of facilities. But what was it about substance abuse that you felt, not only that you could recognize maybe some of the addictive thinking, but that you felt like you could help? Okay, I can help in this particular area. My particular set of skills or interests, whatever, I feel like I can do something here.
Mm-hmm. I think I felt it was hard to put my finger on. Like I said, it just felt like I spoke the language. It felt like I knew, to some extent what people were struggling with, or I recognized some of the communication patterns. I certainly recognized the perfectionism that often goes hand in hand with the addictive personality. And it just sort of felt like coming into this realization of, oh, no, this is very definitely the place where I need to be working, because I know this. I know
Mhm.
what this is like. And I think, through my own history as well, just working through some of those patterns, I have some understanding of what it looks like to build a good foundation, to build a stronger life, to find better patterns for emotion regulation.
Help me out here. Substance abuse, um, treatment centers, the people who suffer with addiction. I mean, that's intense. We all know that. We all hear that. We hear culturally of people going into treatment once, twice, multiple times, and it quote unquote takes multiple. I mean, this is tough stuff. Talk to us about culturally what you do there at Sierra Tucson, how substance abuse treatment is situated in the culture now. What do people need to know?
Well, I'll say, first at Sierra Tucson, we did start out exclusively doing substance use. Now we have a couple tracks. We have the substance use track. We have a mood track and a trauma track as well. I think the magic ingredient that we try to deliver is an absolute focus on the community and on community building and on helping people repair relationships and learn the skills to, deal with the rupture and repair of relationships. So I like to tell our clients all the time, I mean, you're surrounded by some of the most amazing doctors and nurses and therapists that you're gonna, that you'll ever meet, but we're only here for a very limited amount of time. What we really want to do is have and create opportunities to just bring people together, to create a really strong community. We emphasize independent problem solving as much as possible. If somebody says, I don't like my roommate, we'll dig a little bit and understand why, but for the most part, we're going to say, well, what can we do? How do you want to handle this? How can we support you in working on developing this relationship? And I think that goes a long way as well. Like, I think people who are struggling with addiction and mood and trauma have oftentimes either have some, had some interpersonal maybe challenges to begin with, or they've at least, maybe fallen into a place where they're super isolated. Their family
Mhm.
might be upset, frustrated, at wit's end. their job very, very often is in limbo and very tenuous, and their ability to create meaningful connections has been deeply impacted. So like I said, we really just try to get people together and get them communicating with each other. And we say, this is the magic ingredient, not the meds that you'll take or the therapy that you'll get or EMDR versus somatic experiencing. It's the learning to create new connections, learning to repair old connections, and recognizing that a strong connection doesn't mean that you and this other person are always happy. Like there's inevitable rupture and repair. So this is what we do when we rupture these relationships, and this is how you can approach those sorts of things.
That's interesting. I mean, I can think of why relationships or the focus on relationships might be at the forefront of treatment, but I could also see strong arguments for maybe other things that might be chosen to be at the forefront too, such as, we're going to be focusing on trauma, we're going to be focusing on attachment. But of course, you can connect the dots in many different ways. But why is it relate? Talk more about why relationships. Why not looking at some other things? And I'm wondering about the 12 steps. Where does that fit in here? A lot of people are familiar with that too.
Sure. Why relationships? I think it's the most common thread. That's something we can put in place across the board for people coming in with, whatever presenting problem. And then we do have separate tracks for mood versus addiction, co-occurring, and trauma. So the programming certainly looks different, and we'll match people up with different modalities, different medical interventions, TMS, ketamine, what have you. We have great resources here to plug in a lot of things, but I do think that that connection piece or the attachment piece is fundamental, because I think that that's what people can take with them out of a facility like this as they move down to lower levels of care. Just the ability to create a community around them. And to the second part of your question, I think that that's the magic ingredient with AA. AA is always a hotly contested issue with our clients, because people take objection to various parts. But I always say, I love it in particular for that focus on community, finding a sponsor, finding somebody to connect with on a really deep level, having people that you can call late at night if you're struggling, having a group that you can go to, having a community that understands to some degree what's going on for you. And I think that really goes such a long way to reducing shame. So I think, to me, that's one of the real magic ingredients of AA, and one of the magic ingredients of many of the modalities that work really, really well. In this kind of level of care, like a residential level of care, anywhere you go, group psychotherapy tends to be the primary modality that we're putting into place. And I think the reason it works is that here you've got a group of people who can talk and have issues and resolve the issues and confront each other and learn how to confront and be confronted. And so I think that's just a commonality. I think that the people who thrive when they leave a higher level of care like this are the people who have been the most successful at creating relationships and building kind of those relationship skills.
With the clientele, with people who suffer from addiction, and I know it's hard to speak in absolutes here, but is there a thread? Is there a commonality that most oftentimes relationships are suffering?
Yeah, I tend to think that relationships is something that most people struggling with addiction can relate to. Some people will say, yeah, this has always been a struggle. And others will say, no, this has not been a struggle at all until very recently. And a lot of other people will say, yeah, my relationships used to be a lot stronger and then gradually deteriorated over time. But I think that it's so critical to long-term success that I think that it's a great spot to approach addiction from.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things you said you wanted to talk about was what the role of therapists. Talk more about that.
Um, One of the things I've been doing a lot this year is actually talking about leadership and therapists in leadership. And I think it connects to what we were talking about because what I say all the time is in order to have a successful treatment center, whether it's inpatient, residential, or PHP, you have to have a trauma-informed environment for your residents or for your patients. And in order to have a trauma-informed environment for the residents and the patients, you have to have a trauma-informed environment for your staff as well. It has to be holistic, from the top down, things have to be trauma-informed. So I've spent a lot of time lately, both, in consultation and then doing presentations about what that looks like. And I've leaned a bit on what I know, which is, what does that look like for a therapist? Because I think therapists have an amazing skill set at the relational skills of management that are difficult to teach. I think therapists also generally don't have a strong foundation in some of the organizational or operational pieces. If I sit down with somebody and I write up, an action plan or action items, you can just see the instant look of like, what are you talking about in their eyes? So that's been a passion area of mine as well, is talking about like what makes therapists great leaders and how do we lean into that? And then what are some of those foundational skill sets that are maybe less common to therapists that are important to develop as well, or at least to build a leadership team that can support.
Well, if we can unpack that a little bit, because you're in a leadership position there.
Yeah.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
So what have you, in a sense, for lack of a better expression, what have you brought to the table in terms of leadership as a therapist, as a doctor? What do you feel like you're leaning on or leaning into?
I think what's foundational for me, I really take a close focus on staff. I want my staff to feel supported and heard and respected. And I like to really just emphasize and help create a feeling of safety. I guess that's back to that trauma-informed paradigm. I think staff walking in the door have so many stresses already. We want work to be as safe as feasible. So we like to focus on getting to know people, being very, very transparent in terms of what we're doing and what our goals are, focusing a lot on personal and professional growth and training. Like to have, really concise policies and procedures and protocols and clear roles, and promote community and collaboration, and just kind of really drive home all of those trauma-informed leadership principles. And I've been fortunate to be here with a leadership team that's really shared those values. I think before I came in, I think that there was less of a sense of safety, but the CEO and the COO that I started with and the entire leadership team has all just embraced this notion that our staff have to feel safe to do a good job. If we want to do a good job for our clients, we have to really show up for our staff. So it's been really exciting and a great privilege to work with this team in ushering in that trauma-informed awareness.
And when you say safety, obviously there are different types or kinds of safety. There's a physical safety, emotional safety, et cetera, et cetera. But you outlined a lot of different things, delineating clear protocols, et cetera, et cetera. But talk more about how does an employee feel safe? You're not just talking obviously about physical safety.
Mm-hmm. I think I think safety is incredibly complex. I think there are so many different facets to it. I always like to take that question and say that the best way to know what safety is to be very involved with the employees and ask them, what is safety to you? Do you feel safe right now? What sort of things happen here that threaten your sense of safety? Because I think it changes from day to day, moment to moment, staff to staff. I think that the most important part, rather than trying to guess about the important components for safety, is to really have some robust systems to meet with staff and get that information, live and act on that information quickly.
So what are some of the things you might hear if you were to ask, or when you did ask your staff that, what might they have said?
You hear things from, I think communication tends to be very, very critical for one. There are some people that are super worried about the things way outside of our control, like, you know, are we doing well financially? Is the business okay? Like everybody has some awareness that it's a challenge to run a business. It's a challenge to run behavioral health. So some people are worried about, are we financially healthy, and really benefit from transparency around that. Other people, I think it's much more granular. Like, hey, we've asked for a coffee maker in the staff office 2 or 3 times and we haven't been heard, and that makes me feel like nobody's listening, and that makes
Right.
me feel unsafe. So I think communication is really a broad piece of what helps people feel safe. Otherwise, I do think clarity helps too. We're a for a treatment center, we're medium to large, and things constantly shift, and so making sure that we clarify our roles and our responsibilities and policies and procedures is really important. We have enough new hires and enough turnover that we have to kind of regularly go back to, hey, this is who we are, and this is the way we do things. One big initiative we had was, we called it, speaking a common language, just talking about like, how do we respond to frequently asked questions from our clients? What are some of the buzzwords or key phrases that we use here as an organization? So that was a critical piece, as well, as we've kind of learned, how to do a great job at being a trauma-informed workplace.
It's interesting when you brought up this topic, and you said a lot of times, oftentimes, people who go in, become therapists, don't really have what the proclivity for leadership. And that's obviously not all, but I would agree with that. I mean, it seems like a different but yet complementary skill set or inclination.
Yeah, I
Are
think,
you,
when it comes to, I always say therapists are allergic to numbers. When a therapist gets to that level of leadership where there are various KPIs, or, tracking or finances, or, even things like AMA rate or average length of stay, I think that a lot of therapists have an immediate sort of, oh, I don't want to deal with that kind of a reaction. So I think therapists have a fantastic skill set for leadership, but there's that learning hump of getting over that initial resistance to that particular aspect of leadership.
so are you suggesting or kind of making an argument that therapists really begin to lean more into a leadership role, or are you suggesting there are obvious benefits to it? What is your kind of thesis in a sense?
I think that it's something to either lean into, or if you're a therapist in leadership who's fortunate enough to have a leadership team, find somebody on your team who can speak that language. It's absolutely critical to get as many therapists as possible comfortable with the KPIs and the numbers and the metrics, so that they can have a seat at that table and feel really empowered and feel like a valuable part of the team.
So as we kind of wind down here, and I want to put myself in the position of our listeners here, what does it take to work in this context? What does it take to work with this clientele, if I can use that?
I like to say that the most important piece of this job is what you do outside of here. I know it's cliche, but I say forget work-life balance. This is about life-work balance. Because I don't know about you, but if I am burnt out, if I'm not doing well, I'm worse than worthless at work. I'm toxic. And I think that's how we operate. If we're not in a good place, that level of that energy bleeds out really, really quickly. So I think what it takes to work in this workplace is the ability to recognize that, well, everything that we're doing for our clients, we need to do for ourselves as well. We need to be constantly working on growing our own window of tolerance. How do we manage our own dysregulation? How do we create meaningful connection? And just recognizing that it's a balance. Sometimes we talk about self-care like it's a checklist, like I'll go to the gym and I'll spend an hour with my kids and I'll spend, some time doing this. And I think it's an ongoing thing where you have to check in with yourself pretty regularly and say, am I okay? Am I doing okay? Am I headed down the right road? And make sure to keep that balance and really prioritize being able to come to work in a healthy headspace.
Easier said than done, right? For a lot of us. Now, was that something that just came to you naturally, or did you have to like work at that?
Oh,
Like,
that's an ongoing balance for
yeah.
sure. I had the best list of New Year's resolutions just this year. As I said, I think I have this self-care down to an art, and it works so well. From January 1st until I think May 20th, I was so on at work all the time, and then I took a week off to go on vacation, and when I came back to work, it all fallen apart. I came back to work and it was like, I hate being here. This is all terrible. This is awful. And thankfully, I caught myself really, really quickly. But I mean, it always is humbling how quickly all of that can fall apart. And I always tell people too, like, get a good group of people around you who can call you out, because the last
Mhm.
person in the room who knows that you're about to get burnt out is yourself.
Mhm.
So I think it's just so critical to keep an eye on yourself and have other people keeping an eye on you so that they can say, hey guy, are you doing all right? Or, hey Ryan, you just seem like you're spinning a little bit. And I'm fortunate enough to have a great team around me here that knows how to say that to me and knows how to say, no, really, if I'm in a place where I'm not at my best.